All right, so to pick up where we left off with Flask, if you'll remember, we were attempting to try to get our project to go out to DigitalOcean. And after some troubleshooting on trying to figure out why my project wasn't working like it was this summer when I wrote it, it turns out GUnicorn had updated and had changed its structure. Go figure. So, obviously going to run into that a lot, but after a little bit of Google Play and such, I figured that I'm gonna go ahead and drop GUnicorn. So the you can try, but what happens is because Flaskar is a module, and because our main hello file or run file or whatever we wanted, if you go in the project and follow the tutorial to a T, you'll find that you can't import it. And the big issue is what is the GUnicorn command that you use in order to execute it, right? So we have like GUnicorn-W for workers 2, and then we have Flaskar :app or app Flaskar or 900 other choices that we tried to do in there. If you fully go into the documentation, you'll see specifically where those are laid out. And so the first one's actually the module, and then the second one is the command you want to run. In our init, we are using a create app function in order to create the app with all the different settings and everything else that we set up inside of there. So we can't call that, because if you remember, the way this works is when you pull this content down, right, and we run the Flaskar app, it has this init file, which is going to get executed immediately, telling us that Flaskar is actually a Python module at that point, right? That's what the init file basically does for you. So by initializing it as a module, it doesn't ever call create app by default. Now, when we use our development server, it does, but it doesn't on a production server. That's the difference. So when we go out to production, again, there's a couple different ways that we can push this out to production. So if we go back and look at the tutorial, we go to deploy, here they're talking about Waitress, right? And you'll notice if you set up Waitress, they're using Flaskar and they're specifically calling that create_app function in order to get it to run. Well, this doesn't always work either. Tried that one. If you go out here to deploying to production, you will remember that there is a whole list of these different ones out there. And so besides GUnicorn that I've used in the past, one of the more popular ones is Uwsgi. And if you click on Uwsgi, you will see how to get it installed. You will also see how you execute that. And if we look at this command here, we can see that it's going to call the hello file and then run the app in there, because app is getting passed back out of our hello file. Go back to our hello file. Is our underscore name. Well, because this initializes, that suddenly becomes Flaskar. Okay. That was some of the trouble that we were having as we moved through. Now, in order to get this to execute with Uwsgi, you actually have to create a file that does that. And if you look at why we're doing that, from hello, we're going to create app, and we're going to call that create app function. So we need to put this Uwsgi file inside of our setup, and it looks something like this. Really simple, and this is how you can get around the whole GUnicorn issue as well. It's because of the new way that GUnicorn actually pulls your application. However, it doesn't pull it like we think it would, right? So if you get this part set up, you throw this file in here, and then from there, you can go ahead and call this application. So from here, we're going to call that Uwsgi file, and we're going to call the app that's being created by create app inside of it. Now, you'll notice in here, it says it can't find the create app file. It will find it because it's going to inherit things back from Flaskar, which is going to inherit this file, which is then going to call this function, right? So it starts to chain together. Long story short, it obviously can be a little bit of a headache. Now, if we're going to run this on DigitalOcean, we can deploy it the same way that we did before. The only thing we need to modify is our runtime command. edit that real quick. I noticed this was taking a little bit this morning. We just view the raw file. Down on the run command, this is the run command we'll use. Now you'll notice it's slightly different than the run command here. So one, we're not going to use 127.0.0.1. That's our local. If you'll remember, when using DigitalOcean, we need to make sure we use quad zeros, right? So we need to do this bind externally section so that we can do that through. Now, one of the other reasons I've used Uwsgi in the past is it does have good integration with Nginx. So obviously, as I mentioned before, I use Nginx as a proxy server in front of a bunch of these different type applications. So that's another reason I've used it in the past. Gunicorn is probably the most common one you'll see on the net. That's the reason I was trying to show you that. However, once it went from 20.xxx version, that is where that issue was created. So inside here, we'll show you how to do the quad zeros. However, note that they're trying to get you to launch this on port 8000. If you'll remember from DigitalOcean, in order for you to actually use it on DigitalOcean, you have to use port 8080. And they specifically tell you that in the documentation when you deploy it. So we slightly modify that command to do quad zeros 8080. We're going to use P4, which tells us that we have that many workers. And here's the actual application. And if Magic would have everything deployed correctly, we get an error. Right? Once again, we get another error. Now, if we try to figure out why that error occurs, we come into the runtime logs. We'll notice down here that in our Sqlite operational error, there's no such table as post. Well, we created that in our schema. Why didn't it deploy? It's because we never initialized the database. So when you deploy this for the first time, you have to run the initdb command in order for your Flask R app to set up. It's important for this because when you guys do your mini project, you have to remember to tell people when they pull out your application and you're using SQL3 or Sqlite rather, you have to tell them to run the initdb command first, then they can launch the production or the deployment or development server to see if your app works. Okay. So how do we run that command? If we click on console up here at the top, and we come in here and look at our folder, this is our folder that checked out our code. So all we have to do is run flask --app, and for us it is our Flask R app, and we just say init-db. It'll say initialize the database. Remember, this is the code that we set up. And then once that database is initialized, if we come back here to our website and check it, we'll see that we get our post to actually display. All right. So from here, we can do a whole new register. Notice that there's no post compared to the post that I have set up over here, right? It does not transfer our Sqlite database out to the internet because we have that set up in our get ignore. So remember that in your get ignore, we added the instance folder, and therefore this instance folder does not get sent out to Git. However, our application still creates that instance folder. See how that's still created in here? And if we go to see the instance, we'll notice that Flask R Sqlite is there. And this is that Sqlite database. You'll notice that it created it, but we have to initialize that database, AKA put the tables in it. Otherwise, our application won't run. Anybody have any questions over the issues that we had on Tuesday at close and how to finally get that out to publishing on DigitalOcean? All right. For your undergrad students, this isn't going to be as big of a deal as I'll have to double check in my final project, but I don't think I require you to publish it live. But the graduate students, they do have to publish it live. And if you want to publish it live right here on DigitalOcean through the app side, that's perfectly fine for me. So for example, Sam, when you get to the final project, that would be one place that we would have to publish yours out. Now you could put it on Azure because that's your go-to bread and butter. Matter of fact, if you want to do it that way, awesome, because then I would have an example of somebody doing it on Azure. So it's entirely up to you.
Sounds good. So for this assignment, also publish it.
For this assignment, so the tutorial that we went through, we won't actually submit that. For the mini project that we're about to go through, No, that one you do not have to publish. That one's intended for you to submit for me to pull as a development server. But you need to make sure you write the documentation for me to initialize the database first, then run the Flask app. You want to tell me specifically the command to run. So it's Flask, -- excuse me, app, whatever you decide to call your application, and run that from there. The -- debug if you want me to run the debug, that kind of stuff. In this case, it shouldn't be -- debug, right? It should just be something like Flask -- app, my cool project : app, and then run, and that would run the development server.
So it's okay to have the dev key in there, not a production key.
Right, you could put the debug piece in while you're writing your application, but when you're actually having them deploy it, like in your README file, you want to make sure to leave the debug part off.
Okay.
So if you come back here, we had this one here. So Flask -- app, Flask -- debug run, we would leave -- debug off for production. And even then, it's not production, it's just on our development server, but we don't want that debug stuff spitting out at that point. Anybody got any questions over the content we did on Tuesday? All right. So before we get into the mini project, one thing I want to demonstrate to you, we talked a little bit about Bootstrap. Right, and so Bootstrap you can either install via the npm, or we could use the CDN in order to deliver that stuff. So in our case, we would use the CDN in order to bring those files in, which is just a way for us to pull the script files and all that in there. We could go ahead and download the whole files if we wanted to. It's a couple different ways that you want to go about it. So you would use the CDN if you're probably going to have internet access all the time, right? There's no sense in you having that included with your project. However, if you're wanting to let them use your project offline, you would need to include those files along with it. So for the Bootstrap part of things, for our project initially, for the one that we just did rather, and again, you can click on this download, you can get the compiled CSS and the minified JavaScript portion of it, and you just stick that into our static files. So if we download these and we save these wherever our project is, so it's going to be something like C users, JZeller, Python projects, PyCharm projects, and Flask tutorial, static, and then we could just stick this zip file in there for now. And then if we look in that folder, we can extract it. And you'll see we have our CSS and JavaScript, so we're just going to pull those out of this inside, put that in our static, paste it in there. And then we go ahead and get rid of these two files, right? Okay, so now if we go back and look at our project, we'll look under static, and when this refreshes, refresh. Oh, you know what? I put them in this static folder. That's right. Let's pull those out and put them up here in our Flask app, because that's what we have here. Okay, so we have this style .css, but if we go back out to our templates, which is on our inner templates, and we go to our base HTML, remember that here is how we can pull those static files back out of here. So we want URL for static, but we actually want URL for static /CSS, right? That'll get us to the CSS folder. And then you have all these different Bootstrap files that are inside of here. In this case, we want just the main one. And that pulls that up. And so if we actually run our debug and we click on our page, should get that. Let's see here. It doesn't like the. No, because this is pulling from within that folder, but it might not like having the URL for that. It's probably in our routes. So if we go to our blog.
If we could just leave static as it is and put CSS / with the file name, would that work?
That could work as well. Let's take a look at that. I think static is a default route. That's what I was checking at now. But this should work as well. Go there. Let's go back to our website. Not that one. This one, refresh. There we go. So you'll notice it obviously broke all the CSS that we had, right? Because we had specific names for that. But we could tweak and make different headers and such that we want it to be inside of here. So if we go back to this app, and some of the things that we may want to do is take a look at the header, and we have Flask here. Now, if we go and look at the Bootstrap documentation, there's a bunch of different things that you can do over here on the docs. So if we look at the docs, and let's see examples, that's not what I want. Read the docs, there we go. And over here on the left, you can set up a bunch of different components. You can set up a few other things we want. Now, we could set up a grid. The idea behind Bootstrap, right, is that it's able to adjust itself based on the size of the web browser, right? So if I have a real small screen, notice how it dynamically changed it. So now that it almost looks like your cell phone, right? So this allows you to build flexible grids so that it's built by mobile devices. And then if it has enough real estate, you can actually get more on the screen. But I don't have to redesign the whole website. It adjusts this dynamically based on the screen resolution of the device deploying. So we would want to do something similar when we're doing little apps. This isn't going to be a full-blown tutorial on how Bootstrap works, but the grid series is a good start. So you start with a div class called container, and you put your text in the center. Then we have a class row. We have a class column. These different columns can be different widths, and it's going to talk about the different widths you can use. So XS, medium, large. This is going to just dictate how big it's going to be, depending on how you scroll left and right, or how you resize your screen. You could have a bunch of variable content, stack it out. There's a bunch to cover there. What I really want to do is just show you this in a container with a text center. So if we go to this H1, right, we have our navigation tag. We are going to put this in a div tag, right? And inside this div tag, we're going to say class equals container. And then inside here, we're going to move this div tag after we build our table here. Go. This does not have the proper tabbing space. Okay, and then we could set these up in different rows if we wanted to. We could also say in this container that we are doing text-center. And so if we save that, come out to our website again, here, that's our old one, this one, refresh, should put Flask center in the center there. Let's see, it's pulled. Yeah, here, shift, refresh. Tell you what, just go back to the page. should pull it in the center. Oh, that's why. Hopefully you actually spell that correctly. Yeah, there you go. Instead of put it out in the center. Now, obviously, we don't want the log in, log out, and all that stuff to be on the, centered and adjusted that. So you'd have to play with your layout and get it to look right. It's probably going to be just H1 that we would want to do that, right? And it probably wouldn't make the best sense in order to use a bulleted list like this. We would probably want to use something like a navigation bar where we actually create the lists that go all the way through there. There's a couple other things I want to show you here quick in Bootstrap. So you have your columns and your grid layout. In your forms, you guys will need this for your Bootstrap or your mini project that you're going to do. So you could set up different types of forms. For example, here, if we want to get an email address and some text area, notice on the email address, it's going to do some auto checking for us to make sure that it's an actual email address. So there's some nice things to be able to use when you're dealing with forms. You could disable input, make it read only. You could do plain text here when you want to do your passwords or specific passwords. There's some great examples of doing that inside here. You want to do color pickers and data lists, and there's all sorts of stuff you can modify for that. Select boxes, check boxes, whatever you decide to have inside your forms. And so setting up your layout, that's another nice one where you can adjust the form grid, and you can create different grids in order to properly align everything really nice and easy. So you can write it in HTML, but it takes a lot of fussing with to get it to look right. If you use it here in the form of Bootstrap, then you can make that look nice and clean as it shovels down. So like here, you can make this nice complex layout, but you can actually make it look really easy in the HTML code. All right. There's other components. You're going to have things like the accordion, alerts, badge, etc. Some that would be useful for your project is going to be alerts. So when you set up alerts, it's going to come up as this particular color. And all you have to do is set your div class to alert and alert primary. That's going to make it blue up here at the top. Secondary is going to make it this gray. You can adjust these colors as you see fit. So things that would be in there, if you go into our application, right, and we log out and we try to log in and log in with somebody that doesn't exist, except I clicked on somebody that did exist. All right, we get this error of incorrect username, right? If we come back to our project and we look at our templates of auth, oops, cancel, and we got login, and we see this here, okay, that's going to be our template. But if we look at our actual auth.py, when we do a login, we're going to see incorrect user, incorrect password, right? Notice that we're setting this as our error, and that error is what we're ended up passing over to our HTML template. So if we go look at our login, you'll notice that up here we have the error. Where's the error? It should pop right up. Register, we imported it from our base. There you go, from message, import flash message. Okay. So right now we're pulling up messages and we're sending them in and we're just kind of dumping it in here, right? We can check that if we come back here to this and we see this incorrect username and we inspect that. We can see that this is in our div class flash and this is our error message that pops up. So if we go back to our template, we can see that that is basically this code right here. And what that's doing is we're raising errors. It's pulling for an error message. For every error message, we pull it up. Now, this is pretty plain Jane, right? Just says incorrect username, doesn't draw it out to the screen. We can come in here and modify this div class. Instead of just being flash, because we're not really using anything on that, we would want to use something like alert. And we could use alert-danger. And if we save that and come back to our page, we could go to login, we could go to ease, and notice how we get a nice little banner across the top. So super simple change, but it pops up and do that. Maybe we don't want it to just show up on the screen. Maybe we want it to pop up to the user and say, no, there's an error there or something additional in there. In Bootstrap, there's a thing called a modal, and a modal is pretty handy. You guys have probably seen them on several different websites when you're playing with stuff, right? it gives you one of these kind of text boxes inside of it. And so if we wanted to make that a modal by chance, as opposed to doing just an error pop-up, we could do something like this. We could also do this for our login page as a whole. So instead of having them log in on a flat page, maybe we wanted to pop up and have them log in. We've seen this again on multiple websites. So if we come in here, look at our code, and we're going to do something a little bit different. Let's see, outside of our header, let's paste in all the code we just got from Bootstrap. We're going to see our modal title, and so maybe we'll call this something like error. And our button is going to tell them what we want. We have a close button. We have some text that can go in here. So for our text, what we're going to want is our message, right? And so we're going to need to bring this code. It's actually going to bring up a modal for every one of these the way we have it set up, but it'll work. So we take this, we paste this code in here, and then we want our message. We want that here in the paragraph text. And then in the footer, again, we have close, or we have like a save changes, right? We don't care about the save changes. We're just going to allow them to close the error. That all looks good. Get rid of this loop. And now if we save this, come back to our website, we go to our login page. Should get a pop up there. Okay, let's go find out when I messed up. Oh, we have to be able to trigger the modal, right? We could do that with like a login button, would be the better way of doing that. So we don't want it to pop up like a modal inside of there. We want that to trigger that they're going to do something like that. So we would have to set that target based on our login button. We would have to adjust this button. Now, obviously this button's gray. That's another thing you can tweak. If you come in here to buttons, you'll see that you get different basic styles of buttons. You can also adjust whether you want to curve them or outline them or different sizes of the buttons, disabled state, that kind of stuff. All you have to simply do is look at your button, add a class of button, and button primary will make it blue. So if we come back here to our code, let's get rid of this stuff that I just did. It's not exactly a great demonstration of that. And we go to our login button, which is going to be on our login page. And input type submit, we actually want this to be a button. So instead of input type there, we're going to do a button. Right, and where it says primary, we're going to make that login. We can make this an input type of submit. And button, and then we go ahead and close our input. Not the font. And we're going to say a value for this. Type button, there we go. Oh, no. You can see a little refresh gives us this button here, right? Pretty simple inside of it. So login, we got a submit button and we got a login. Now we're getting both of those because of this submit, this input type here. So if we just close that, save that, should get both of those. There you go. Now we got a nice little button. So play with Bootstrap in order to clean up and give yourself a little bit of a nice look at whatever you want to do. You can set up popovers, you can set up spinners, all sorts of little things that you can add inside of there. Bunch of utilities if you want things to float or interact, whatever it is. For the purposes of your homework assignment, I think what I'm asking you to set up is at least one modal. And so you can adjust that login side to use a modal class. And you guys need to figure out how to use this modal class. You can come down here to this launch example. It's going to do something like this, right? So maybe you adjust your login page to do something like this versus putting it straight on the screen. You could do a static modal where it's like this. You can make it to where they have to click on something. Maybe you're going to display a bunch of information on something. You could have it pop up as a modal and use it like this. I don't care how you use it. Any one of these examples, you can do that. So here's one where the modal pops up in the center of your screen, be beneficial. This one where you can actually scroll and get it centered in the screen. Yes, you should be able to. No? Oh, I was going to say, I thought so, but okay. He wins. I can put up a button with a popover title inside of it. Yeah, you should be able to integrate. You can even put the whole thing up as a grid, right? So I can use a grid within my modal. It shifts. There you go. That one I don't have a good answer for. If you can make it work, you're great. So you can make a first modal, then pops you over to a second modal, pops you over to a third modal, right? You can do some fancy animation. So if you don't want it to necessarily fade like this, you can adjust that animation, whatever you see fit. Try to get some creativity. That's all I'm looking for, because that's going to help when you guys go through. You can adjust the size of the modal. So there's full screen small. That one does the whole screen as a modal pop-up. Below the large, there you go. And then you can obviously tweak that even further with your own style sheets and more. So outside of that, that brings us to our mini project 3. All right, so you guys are going to create some small web app of your choice. The goal is to come up with a small web application that meets these requirements, all right? In other words, I ain't telling you what to do with Flask. I need you to come up with something that you want to do. Now, you can use the tutorial as a template, and I'm actually recommending that in some of this as well. So for example, the first 5 points is putting your comments on, same old standard stuff. 5 points for proper import of different packages, in this case, Flask and whatever else you may need. Again, you don't need to give me the packages like GUnicorn to run the server. Yeah. No, not really. It's the main app file that I'm looking for, the app.py or whatever you decide to call it. 70 points on this one is this big chunk out here in the middle. So first 10 points is just setting up a proper folder structure. Use the template, use the tutorial as an example, right? Next 20 points is having a minimum of 5 pages that use a proper template structure. So you need your, whatever your web application is, needs to have 5 pages, which means I should have at minimum probably 1 to 5 templates, right? I should have like a base template that has a structure that you guys import for the total look and feel. And then each individual page may have its own template, or maybe you are dumping extra information into one template. That makes sense? Use the templating system the way you're supposed to. But that does not mean that you need 5 templates in order to render 5 pages. Yeah. No. Yes. You'll have to download and put it in. And there is a way you could do that in PyCharm. If you do like a total new project, you can do a Bootstrap project and tell it specifically what version. But that's going to create an HTML project. It's not going to set you up with a Flask project. So, and yes, if you cheat and use Flask here, it's going to set up your project the right way right off the bat in terms of file structure and all that. But if you want to go from scratch on the pure Python, you can simply do that. And then import all your packages, get your folder structure the way you want it, etc. If you don't want to download those packages, you are more than welcome to use the CD inside. So you don't have to download them. If you would rather use the CDN for your project, remember to do that. At the top of your HTML code, you'll need to, excuse me, add this CSS link inside of that. And so you would copy this in, come up here, in this case, to our base. And you'll notice at the top where we have this link, where we're bringing in our style sheet, you would actually just paste this code in and it would pull it from the CDN. And you guys wouldn't have to point it to a local directory file. Either way is acceptable to me. Don't care. All right. Let's see here. What else do I want to show you? Okay. You need to have at least one page that's going to utilize a form, and that will get you the proper get and post setups in your route. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you go back and look at our project and you look at auth, remember that when we specifically tried to do something like a login, that you need to be able to use the get and post, and that in this process that you use the post first. And if it doesn't work, then you use the default get in order to pull that information. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay. You'll need to set up a Sqlite database with a minimum of 2 tables linked together with a foreign key. For example, the username, password, registration stuff that we did has a link to it, right? We have an auth table and then we have a post table. You would want something that's different than the post table, but it links back to the user that logged in. If you don't remember that structure, you can come back here to the schema here, and you'll notice, remember, we had a user table with an ID, username, and password. Over here in the post table, we had this foreign key that goes back to the ID of the user. You would do something as opposed to a post that you would be linking that user back to the user table. All right. Last but not least, you have Bootstrap in your templates. You'll need to use that. I won't dictate what modules you use, how you use it, but the more you practice and play with it, the better. You need at least to make use of one modal at one point. Don't care how you do it. It's entirely up to you. Last is you need to set up some sort of register and login system, and you can use a tutorial as an example. You may want to have more information. So instead of just getting a username and password, you may want to get their full name, address, whatever you want to store in your database. All right. You need to have your minimum of 5 commits as usual. You need to be checking out the master branch. Make sure you do your pip requirements and your pip freeze so that you have those requirements. Otherwise, our pip package will not work. And then in the README, same old thing. You need to mark everything in. Specifically, make sure you explain the steps of initializing the database and then how to run your development server. So I should see those links inside of there. And I'm pointing out this last part because we just covered that here today. So if you don't remember that command, if you come back out here to the terminal, in order to initialize your application, it's Flask --app. In this case, it's Flask R because that's what we called it. init-db. Right? And if I hit enter, that's going to initialize the database, create the tables, do everything else. Then from there, we can tell people to run the command Flask --Flask R run. Okay. You should have the same structure, so you can use the whole instance code and all that kind of stuff if you want, or if you want to tweak it for your own file, that's fine. But you should not be submitting me a Sqlite database, right? I should have to initialize the database local to my machine. The only way you would want that to go up is if you have a bunch of example information inside your database, in which case that's fine. You would typically put that in the schema. So you would say something like, create this entry inside the user table, and you would add that in this table here in order to get that out. If you got questions on what I'm talking about there, I can walk you through it. But if you need like default data in the database, you can put that in the schema file. When we initialize the database, it automatically dumps these entries into whatever table you tell it to do. Essentially, you would do something like when we did the select all from the database, you would be doing those similar type commands in here. Only you would be doing an entry. So if you go to auth, and we have this select where we're checking on the login, right, to make sure it's there. In this case, you have this DB insert into user, blah, 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 right? This is the command. You would take this SQL string out. You would go to your Flask here. Whoops, sorry, not the right one. This guy in our schema, and you would have commands like this at the end. Only instead of question marks, you would tell me what I'm inserting in there. That's how you can create default entries into the database. So if you want your program to have, say, an admin user by default, and you tell them the default password is admin, then you would put that in your README and you would set this intro up into here. Then you would tell them that they need to change the password or whatever you want. All right. Let's see. That's it. That's all I got for the mini project, right? Now you're all stressing because it's Thursday and this is always due on Sunday, right? It's because you already looked at the due date. All right, fine. That's correct. No, the due date I set for Sunday of next week. So you have basically 10 days to turn this in. All right. I didn't want to set it for 16th at midnight because I want you guys to do some kind of quality project in there. All right. You're welcome. To avoid deadline extensions and all that, it's just due next week on Sunday. All right. And if you don't get it until the 24th, that'll be fine because I'm traveling on the 23rd. So, in other words, I don't care about the due date. What I care about is that you figure out a project here. If you don't remember, there's a lot of moving parts to a Flask project, right? So I need your guys' feedback. Is this enough time for a due date, that kind of stuff? Because I want to be able to adjust that and make it doable. Yeah, exactly. And honestly, that's real life, right? In real life, you take some code and you manipulate it the way it should be. You guys will probably end up with something that looks nothing like the tutorial, but at least you had some boilerplate template to work with. Part of that comes with Bootstrap, so you can do however you want. It's your web app. And again, the more you play with this, when you get to your final project, there is points for style and all that other stuff. So the more you try to figure out now, the better off it is for the final project. Now we are going to go ahead and start on Django next week. So we'll be talking about it. There won't be a project that first week. It'll be within the second week, right? And that one, I will obviously move the due date so that you have another week to work on that. There's only 4 mini projects, so I'm not looking to beat you up on that. All right. That is all I got. You guys have the rest of the time to kind of get started, or if you got questions or whatever else, let me know. I'm going to get this video posted up there so you guys can go back and reference all of these. So all these videos should be up to date now. You've got the 2 from last week, and you'll have the 2 from this week. Make sure you're taking advantage of those Django templates and all that. I can lecture on all this stuff, but to be honest, until you start coming up with your own idea, nothing falls in place. I'm fully aware of that, especially with my monotone voice. All right, we'll stop the recording at least.